When it comes to documenting your sea service, this is going to be one of the elements that kind of indicates what level of license you get. Most people that are applying for their captain's license, I would say, have spent a significant amount of time on the water and are looking to, um, you know, get their license for a variety of reasons. However, if you're brand new, you're not really going to be able to get your captain's license unless you have adequate amount of sea time. So your first step is going to be to go gather that sea time as a deckhand, as a mate, whatever you need to do to get all that sea time. There's a couple of ways to document the sea time, and probably the easiest way is if you have an employer that employs you on your vessel. You can get a letter from them. For instance, this is a letter from me when I was captain of a tall ship. They told me the dates that I was on there, the days of sea service, as well as the tonnage of the vessel, the length overall, all the required stuff that you would need to have to prove that you were on the vessel for this amount of time. So this gives you, a total of a certain number of days of sea time on the vessel, and that's going to be perfectly adequate for Coast Guard service. However, if you don't have that opportunity, if you haven't worked for a maritime company before, it's perfectly fine to document your sea time on this form, which is the 719 Sierra form, which is for vessels less than 200 gross tons. So most small vessels, this will be just fine for. So good news and bad news. The top part of the form is pretty easy. The bottom part of the form is pretty challenging, to be honest. But up at the top, we've got our name, our reference number, our merchant mariner credential number. If you don't have it, that's okay. Just list your social security number. And then very important, this form is only for one vessel. So if you have served on, say, 3 vessels, you have to submit 3 separate forms. So the vessel name, the tonnage, the length, the width, the depth. And they right here say if known. If known. If you don't know it, that's totally fine. You do need to have the length as well. In terms of the propulsion method, these are your choices: motor, steam, gas, sail, and auxiliary sail. So a couple common questions. Your typical powerboat, whether it's outboards, inboards, whatever, is going to be a motor vessel. Steam vessels are pretty uncommon, as well as gas turbine vessels, particularly less than 200 gross tons, I would say. If your vessel is primarily sail only, then you would be on a sail vessel. However, if you're on a typical cruising sailboat that has a motor and a sail, it's going to be an auxiliary sail vessel. So if you choose sail or auxiliary sail for your, say, island packet boat, no worries. Either way is going to be fine, but traditionally it would be an auxiliary sail vessel. And then what is your role on board? They give you some flexibility here with the etc., but generally if you were the captain, you were the master. If you were not the captain, but you had a significant role on it, such as being in charge of a watch, steering the vessel all alone, or with some people underneath you, you would be a mate. If you were operating somebody else's vessel, right, if they owned it and you were operating it, you would be the operator. And then otherwise, if you were a deckhand or an engineer on board, you can list that as well. So try and choose something like this rather than passenger. You won't get credit for passenger. And then where did you serve upon this vessel? Was it in the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Great Lakes, the Western Rivers, for instance? You can name the body of water there. Okay, this is where the form gets a little bit challenging. Not necessarily challenging, just that it's a little bit awkward. So what you're going to want to do is list the total number of days that you were underway. So for instance, if I worked on my friend's boat fishing in June and July for the past 5 years fishing, what I could do is say, 2015, I served aboard it for 4 days. 2016, I served aboard it for 12 days. 2017, 3 days. 2018, say 2 days, right? And now we've got all these number of days. So let's quickly add them up. That's 5, 9, 21 days it looks like, right? So I've got 21 days on this vessel and only one form per vessel. So if you've got a different vessel, you have to do a different form. So down here, we're going to say the total number of days is 21 days. How many hours underway were you out there per day, right? So I'll just give you some advice. You want to shoot for probably more than 4 hours, to be honest, but you shouldn't really lie on the form, so just do your best to estimate it. So we'll say we were underway for 4 hours per day, and how far offshore were we? Let's say we went out fishing 3 miles offshore. And this vessel maybe was in the Atlantic Ocean, so we had 0 days on the Great Lakes. And then this is another tricky part here, the boundary line. The boundary line. The boundary line is the line pretty much that divides rivers and lakes from the ocean. So this is not the same as the Colregs demarcation line, if you're familiar with that from the rules of the road. Just as a couple examples, if you're out in Long Island Sound, although those are inland waters for rules of the road purposes, those are seaward of the boundary line, right? So you would put those days down here. You're outside the boundary line. But if, in Long Island Sound, if you were up the Thames River, you would be shoreward of the boundary line. Another couple examples, maybe if you were in the Gulf of Mexico, you would be seaward of the boundary line. Unless you were up the Mississippi River, for instance, or inside Houston-Galveston Harbor, then you would be shoreward of the boundary line. And how about on the Pacific Ocean? Say you're in San Francisco Bay, you would be shoreward of the boundary line for most of this stuff inside the bay from there. If you have any questions, you can always take a look at 46 CFR Part 7. You can just Google that and it'll tell you where the boundary line is for your particular region, or just search it on the internet as well. So let's say we were out in Long Island Sound fishing, so we're gonna have 21 days there. Okay, and then what you need to do is kind of attest to the vessel that you were on it. So most commonly, say you were on your friend's boat, you're gonna be down here. So the owner or operator or master should sign this. So your friend is gonna sign this, date it, and then give their information. If you owned the boat yourself, you can do that up here as well. So you're gonna sign it, and then instead of your friend down at the bottom, you're gonna sign all that stuff yourself. Now, how do you prove that you owned that vessel? Well, it says that those who do not own their vessel must submit letters or evidence from licensed personnel or the owners. But if you do own the vessel, you can look up 46 CFR 232. So I'll do that. We'll bring that over. We'll take a look at it. Here's 46 CFR 10232, which is sea service. You can read all about the requirements for the form. But here's the part that they're looking for. So if you own your own vessel, you can attest to your service and provide proof of ownership. And that's all they're really looking for, is proof of ownership in that CFR. So if you had a license registration for the vessel, a bill of sale, any kind of thing like that, you can submit that as well. So that's under 46 CFR 232, which you can look up on this is the Cornell Law School website. If you ever go to that, it's very, very useful, or just an internet search of those numbers will give the same result. Okay, and then on the form, that's really about it. There's no instructions or anything else you need to do. Just remember, the key elements is going to be one vessel per form. So if you had a couple of different boats that you worked on, then you can submit one form for each one. The Coast Guard's not going to necessarily go back and check this stuff, but you should be honest. That's a good policy with this kind of stuff, and make sure that you actually did those sea days.